Step 4, isolators. Further development of lower TA dominant and upper CT dominant registers separately. The objectives of Step 4. Further development of the TA dominant lower register coordination and the CT dominant upper register coordination separately, increasing the student's ability to access lower and upper registers at will. The order of priorities. Adduction. Appropriate vocal fold adduction. The vocal folds adduct at the onset of phonation in both the lower and the upper registers. The tone produced in the lower and the upper registers is equally clear. The voiced stop consonant G in the go-go-gi-gi exercises will encourage appropriate vocal fold adduction. Larynx height. Neutral to slightly low laryngeal position. The larynx can assume various positions in the throat, high, neutral, or imposed. It is important to avoid laryngeal hiking, caused by the engagement of the extrinsic suprahyoid elevator muscles. The go-gi exercise and most of the Step 4 exercises are performed with a slightly imposed larynx to counteract the swallowing muscles that tend to hike the larynx. Register balance. Good singing requires a balanced onset, balance between the registers, balance between the vocal folds and the air pressure, resonance balance, and balance of the body with good alignment. In Step 4, we focus on creating equal strength in the lower and upper registers. Registration, or the experience of contrasting lower and upper registers, is a result of intrinsic muscle activity combined with resonance. The intrinsic muscles, the TA, CT, LCA, IA, the intrinsic muscles are attached to the larynx and are responsible for vocal fold contraction, lengthening, adduction or closing, and abduction or opening. There are two muscle groups responsible for the differing experiences of lower register and upper register in singing. The paired thyroarytenoid or TA muscles are attached behind the ridge of the thyroid cartilage in front and attached to the arytenoid cartilages in back, thus the name thyroarytenoid. These muscles contract, making the vocal folds shorter, thicker, and less tense. Though CT and TA work together, the TA are dominant on low notes. That's why it's known as the lower register or chest register. The paired cricothyroid or CT muscles are attached to the thyroid cartilage on top and the cricoid cartilage on the bottom, thus the name cricothyroid. These muscles contract, bringing the thyroid cartilage downward, stretching and elongating the vocal folds and making them more taut. These muscles are more dominant on high notes, known as the head voice or upper register. Two other paired muscles that create vocal fold adduction are the LCA, or lateral cricoarytenoid muscles, and the IA, or interarytenoid muscles that draw the folds together to create medial compression. The LCA muscles adduct the folds for about 3/4 of their length, beginning at the front of the larynx, and the IA muscles close the remaining 1/4 at the back end. When you whisper, the IA muscles do not close the back section of the vocal folds. And here are the intrinsic muscles, and you can see the LCA right here on the side. Vocalis and TA are kind of interchangeable in a way. The vocalis is the inner part of the TA. The intrinsic muscles include those responsible for contracting, which is the TA, lengthening, which is the CT, and adducting or closing the vocal folds, and that's TA, LCA, and IA. And those responsible for abduction or opening of the folds, that's the PCA. The vocalis is the medial section of the TA, the part closest to the glottis. Here are the vocal folds on high and low pitch. You can see that they're much longer on a high pitch and thinner than they are on a low pitch. When singing a high note, the singer's vocal folds elongate due to the tilting action of the thyroid cartilage as a result of CT muscle contraction. When we sing lower pitches, the vocal folds shorten due to the contraction of the intrinsic TA or thyroarytenoid muscle. When singers strain for high notes, they are trying to hit the high note with the shorter, thicker TA dominant vocal fold position, as we see in figure B, instead of allowing the folds to lengthen and thin, as in A. Here's our thyroid cartilage tilt. The contraction of the cricothyroid muscle tilts the thyroid cartilage forward and down, stretching and lengthening the vocal folds attached at the front of the larynx to the thyroid cartilage. Registration and TA contraction. TA muscle contraction to a large extent determines registration. In the lower register or speaking voice, that's figure C, the TA pushes the folds toward one another. The vibrational wave begins at the bottom of the vocal fold and travels upward. In the upper register mix, the TA is less contracted and the vibrational wave begins higher on the vocal fold. Therefore, there is less vibrating vocal mass. On the highest pitches, the TA muscle is not contracted and the ligament is the tension-bearing element of the fold. Yodeling is an abrupt shift from figure C to figure A. Further development of TA dominant and CT dominant phonations separately. For step 4, our objective is the further development of TA dominant lower register and CT dominant upper register separately before mixing the registers, which we will do in step 5. When we are teaching these or singing these exercises, we want to make sure that the thumb and finger are on the corners of the mouth at all times to prevent spreading. We want to remember to expand the midsection, front, sides, and back when we breathe, and to maintain outward firmness against the breathing belt. This is known as the 360-degree singer's breath. We can use the cry and staccato with these exercises for increased vocal fold adduction. We want to make sure that the larynx is low and relaxed on both the low and the high pitches. The sound should be clear and strong on both low and high pitches. The constriction or middle hump of the tongue should be high against the top molars on the E sounds. If the sound is muffled or the E is not correct, have the student go back to the A-E tongue exercise, gradually increasing the speed. The tip of the tongue rests on the lower front teeth for sustained pitches. Don't let the tongue tighten and pull backward down the throat on those sustained pitches. You want to make sure that you're looking in the mirror to make sure that there's no space between the tip of the tongue and the lower teeth. I might just want to take a moment here to explain the setup. We have 4 columns here. The first column is the male exercises. Next to that is the male no vocal exercises, and that's where you can have the option of just playing the track and then choosing your own syllable here. Highly recommend that you use the highlighted syllables first because those create the greatest effectiveness in the voice. But once the student is phonating correctly using these syllables, you're going to want to move on to these other alternate syllables. And so that's why we have the no vocal track. And then next to that, we have the female demo track with the vocal, and then the female no vocal track. Obviously, these are in different keys, male and female. So this one requires a little bit of energy and punch to make it work. It sounds like this. Go, go, gee, gee, go. So that's a gee on the top. And then we're going to reinforce the top note. All right, that's our round 1. Round 2, where we're developing these new coordinations that we've just experienced. Here's a triad slide. And another whole step, half step exercise. And by the way, when you're working on various steps or when we're designing a lesson plan, we don't want to spend the whole lesson on one step. We would like to hit as many steps as possible within one lesson, given the rate of the student's development. An ideal lesson might actually sort of incorporate an exercise from each of the steps. The more advanced the student becomes, the less you'll need steps 1 through 4. Because once they've established the lower and the upper register and they're real secure with what that coordination feels like, quite often I'll start a student on step 5, which is our mixing exercises. But it takes a few months to get them to that point, though. You don't want to just right off the bat give somebody who's never sung before a long scale, because you're defeating your purpose there. If there's nothing to mix, you're not mixing. In other words, a lot of times they don't have a lower register, or the lower register is not present enough. And so that's why step 4 is so important. You definitely want to isolate those registers before you start to mix them. Isolate and strengthen them in many cases. Again, using go and gi. Here's an isolator bounce exercise. Go, go, go. And by the way, the vocalist here is Lewis Ray, one of my associate teachers here at Sing Like a Star. All right, here's the skipping exercise. And the advanced isolator. This one's pretty hard. The idea here is to, ensure that both of the notes are equally strong. And the closer these intervals come to one another, the harder that is to do. So when you're singing a quite large interval, low register, upper register, it's a little easier to do than when you're just hanging out right on the bridge. So here's what this one sounds like. This is really advanced. You would not give this to somebody until they've spent quite a bit of time in rounds 1 and 2. A lot of times teachers ask how they should divide lessons. We really do want to try to get enough of a vocal workout in to ensure that there's vocal development going on. We're not all about, just warming up and then let's sing the song a bunch of times and don't get any better or don't see any changes. So at least half the lesson should be exercises. I tend to do even more than that in the beginning months, just because we want to make sure that there is some vocal development going on. But you really have to gauge the student and their attention span. If you're working with really young students, they may not be able to stay focused for that amount of time. But just keep in mind that the idea here is vocal development, not warming up. They're two completely different things. Warming up is what you do before a performance, and a warm-up is a real easy, light, let's just get things moving and lubricated kind of approach. A vocal workout, you want to think like an athlete. We're doing a workout. We're trying to improve strength and coordination and things like that. So it requires energy. And focused attention. That's the other thing. If you don't see changes, it's because you're not practicing with focused attention. You're just kind of warming up. You need to be really aware of what your goal and objective is, and how close are you coming to that goal or objective every time you perform the exercise.